Welcome to SAs and IPAs, presented by CDI Studios.
All right, thank you everybody for joining us in another episode of SAs and IPAs. I'm Michael Colonno, the AVP of the Data Center Solutions team here at CDI. I'm joined by a guest, and I have a co-host this time. Let's start with our co-host. Back by popular demand, there was a voting poll. People revolted. All the villagers. It was awful.
For the record, I was the only one that voted. But yeah, I'm Bob McCouch, Director of Network Architects here at CDI. So I'm enjoy working with my esteemed colleague, Mr. Colonno, here on this project.
And Mike.
I am Michael Moran. I'm the Senior Manager for Solutions Engineering for Commercial East, Corporate East, VMware. We changed our
whatever it is today, yeah. So there's even something more special. So everybody knows what we are imbibing today was made by this gentleman as well. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you brought with us today?
Yeah, sure. So you got me intrigued with the whole IPAs with SAs. But I'm not a big IPA guy, but I'm willing to be converted.
Well, I think as everybody has kind of, seen, we've morphed, originally it was all IPAs, but, everybody likes a little something different. And then there's plenty of other brewskis. No, there's plenty of other beers that we could be drinking. This gentleman over here is nuts. He keeps on trying to push for a whiskey or a bourbon episode. And I'm like,
it's a short one.
That is not a good episode to have.
Be short.
That I feel like that's one of the ones where, our poor Spence has got to be there with the button, just waiting to bleep it out.
6 seconds.
Almost like Morse code to like this. So
you'd be on delay.
Yeah.
But and then sadly, I love beer. Yeah, there was no issue with it. But somewhere along the line, developed like a wheat allergy or something like that.
Yep.
And
the same thing.
I, for whatever reason, I would go out and I'd come and I didn't drink too much. I wake up the next day like I had a head cold, right? And tracked it back to certain beers. So I can have Hefeweizens, I can have certain beers that don't, So I kind of got away from beer, but a buddy of mine was like, hey, let's try brewing some cider. So, we got some cider. Anybody from New Jersey is familiar with Old Wicks. This is Melix. I do have one of their hop ciders here, but this is their cider that I pitched champagne yeast in.
Okay.
We starved it a little bit, so it develops that more sour taste. The champagne yeast eats all the sugar, so it's super dry. And it's bottle conditioned, so the bottle's kind of probably does not come out nice on the camera, but that's because it was sitting
real.
In my house for a year.
It's not an Angry Orchard.
No. This was just a bunch of knuckleheads in my garage.
Yeah. So instead of SAs and IPAs, now we've got solutions and cider.
Yeah, the solutions cider. Oh, look at that! Quick, quippy, and quick.
Right.
I like it. Yeah, I'll tell you, I definitely like this. My wife had a similar thing to what we're kind of describing in terms of a wheat intolerance, especially beer, just bloated and feeling awful the same day, not even next day. So we had a huge cider kick for years. So I definitely like this because that dryness, so often you're left with apple juice that happens to have alcohol in it, and that's not what I'm after. So,
absolutely.
So yeah, I like this a lot. Thank you.
Thanks. And the label we came up was Pucker Face because the first batch we made was so fruity sour we got lockjaw. He was like, okay, yeah, that was a bad one.
Yeah. So before we started recording, just so everybody knows, we're talking about how he opens it first just to make sure you make apple cider vinegar. And I'm like, well, at least it's good for your blood sugar, digestion and things like that. Yeah. So there's some health benefits.
Definitely a bit of a nostalgic flavor there. Actually, I had mentioned I've made cider before, sort of after I started brewing beer. Didn't always love the results that I got, but in college, that was actually where I got my start home brewing was, it was pretty much, right? It was my sophomore year, and none of us were 21 yet. And of course, you can't buy alcohol if you're not 21, but nothing prevents you from buying brewing yeast under 21. So we would get big jugs of apple juice from the Price Chopper. And add some sugar to them and some yeast, set them on the back of our 25-inch CRT monitors back in the day, nice and warm. It was
that's fantastic.
It did the job. We'll just leave it there. It did the job.
It did the job.
It was not nearly as refined as Pucker Face.
Yeah. Thank you very much. You guys are too kind. But okay.
So as you might have seen, on a lot of our episodes, we like to talk about, so you are a peer of ours, right? So you're not just a SE or an SA or architect or whatever, in terms of that space, but you also lead a team, right? So I'm going to kind of do a two-tier kind of ask for you. Is one, how did you get into that architecture solution space, pre-sales? What was that kind of defining moment, just like a booze that you might not drink anymore, right? And then also, what got you into leadership? Because it's not for everybody. I know one of the things that we see all the time is people want more money. They want more money. They don't want to lead. They just want more money. And that's the only thing they think is up the hierarchy is how you get more money, not laterally or not horizontally in other positions, right? So I'm interested to see, like, well, what was it? So first, is there a booze that you don't drink anymore? And you don't have to share the story, but like, is there something that just like right now you have to like run off the room?
I've actually recovered a beer or an alcohol that I don't drink anymore. So I had a very bad experience with tequila in college.
Okay.
And it was to a point where like somebody cracks open tequila on the other side of the room and I'm out of there.
Yeah.
Like it's just like, But my sales partner over at Dell before I joined VMware was just like, what do you mean you don't drink tequila? You're not drinking the right tequila. So he brought me to a tequila bar and he introduced me to some top shelf tequila. And I have to say, that was a bad experience. I kind of
in college.
There's college tequila, college tequila, and then there's Asado,
So I have to say that I recovered one of the liquors that I wasn't drinking for 30 years. And now I'm like, all right, I still only have one bottle of tequila in my liquor cabinet, but So okay, that was trying to what old is new again.
That's right. Yeah, our CRO was a big high-end tequila person. I had a similar comment because I only would drink like mid-tier at best, maybe Patron type stuff. It's like, I could, maybe in a margarita it's good, but he gave me, I forget what the label was, so don't ask me. And I was like, okay, this is I can sip this. This is fantastic. Yep. Same thing with, I'm starting to see an emergence of high-end aged rums.
Yeah.
That's becoming popular, right? Which is pretty cool also because most people just think of like
rum and coke or something like that.
Yeah. Like some like a Captain Morgan's or even like a Parrot May or something like that. You think of these just sugary mixers. You don't think of like a really nice like from Puerto Rico or wherever, Jamaica.
Yeah, I picked a few of those back. Coming back from the Bahamas a few years ago. Like a nice aged like sipping rum is actually it's a wonderful spirit.
Yeah. I have to. I tried one recently, but I want to try a couple more. So that's a defining moment of your IT career in terms of getting into pre-sales. What do you think that was?
Well, I started out in break fix and support, right? So I started out answering phones and getting abused, and then I wound up being a field technician. He sent me to tech school so I could fix everything. And then, so I started hanging out with some of the pre-sales folks on the other side of,
Sure.
And when there would be an opening, I would inquire, and then, something like, oh no, we can't lose them on as a field tech, we can't lose them on the help desk and things like that. So
that's a nice way to keep people around is not let them grow. And
so that was actually an identifying moment for my leadership, which I'll come into. But at the end of the day, I wound up leaving that company, and I was recruited by Sun Microsystems back in '96. And what was interesting about that is I joined that team, the youngest person by 15 years, right? So it was a pretty senior team that had been around the block, and they're like taking a chance on the effing new guy, right? And my boss said that, he's like, look, we're taking a chance on you, don't screw it up, right? So that was also pretty. Yeah, but I wanted so bad to be a part of a Sun Microsystems. I wasn't going to screw that up.
Yeah, right. We have a lot of Sun heritage here at CDI, right. And obviously VCE had a lot of Sun, 100% guys.
It was like an old home day.
Yeah. I actually just saw Rosen the other day.
There you go. Perfect. Yep. Absolutely. So so really, it was at Sun Microsystems where I cut my teeth. In pre-sales. But if you go back to '96 and you kind of like what is that role? It's very different than what it is today.
Sure.
I mean, I walked in the door and they're like, "Oh, here's a Spark 20 with compilers on it," and I put it under and I went down to Bell Labs and I was cross compiling code by that afternoon. So it was a little different.
That's different.
A little different than what you expect. Like no hands on keyboard now.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things.
Gums,
Right. There's a lot of things that presets can't.
Not zones.
Right. But it was. I just loved it. I was addicted to the technology.
Yeah.
It was such a fast-paced time. Sun was like on its ascent, right? So it was pretty cool. And also it was as much as it was a sales-led organization, it was an engineering-led organization.
Well, that's also why it's not with us anymore.
there's a blend.
Ran a company.
That's 100% true. So
Awesome tech. I think I've even mentioned this in another episode. Is we always used to sit there in time, basically, until one of the Sun guys, we had a training, said, "Well, we had that at Sun, whenever it was, in '89, we did blah blah blah." Drink.
Yeah.
Oh, wait for it. They're talking about containers. Let's see how long it takes.
100%.
So, but yeah, it was amazing technology. It's still things that we're just starting to reuse again. So yeah.
Yeah, so then I got, full of myself and I decided, right before the .com bubble burst that I would get into startups. So I left.
Perfect
time, right? So I left Sun Microsystems and I went with Blue Arc. I don't know if you guys remember Blue Arc, right?
Yeah.
So they had a crazy concept. And that's the other thing. I'm addicted to geeky, super fringy, geeky tech.
Okay. Yeah.
So their CTO got me on, we're building a NAS server on FPGAs. And I'm like, oh, sign me up. I got to do that. Right. Which was total fringe.
Really cool.
Total fringe.
Yeah.
And so I was there for about 4.5 years. And that's where I got promoted to leadership.
Okay.
Right. And it was the classic sense, right?
Yeah.
Like you're the most senior engineer on the East. You're running the East now.
Right.
You have no manual. Here's an anvil. Now you got to go manage a team and just kind of kick you off into the deep end.
Right.
Well, you're super successful yourself.
Right.
I assume you can just copy and paste.
So go clone yourself.
Just have everyone else do what you
Just
do.
clone yourself, right? So that was an amazing learning experience, right? Okay. So of course, what did I do? I just became super SE, which we all
did. Everybody else,
right?
Yeah.
You try to be super SE, you break. Somewhere along the lines by rote osmosis, you learn some rudimentary leadership skills, and then eventually you take a class.
Right.
Yeah.
Somebody gives you a book. It's
Well, we are huge. Speaking of Sun people, we're huge with Riv. So Jim Riv Yellow, Sun guy. We're huge in terms of his leadership stuff here at CDI. But it's just you're spot on. Eventually, you have to have some sort of guidance because you're like, okay, we're kind of winging it here.
Right.
Exactly.
We'll figure this out. Every time it's I'll be on a first date. Maybe this will go well, maybe it won't. I don't know.
That's right. Yeah, but it's pretty defining though. I think what's great about coming from the ranks and any SA that wants to think about leadership, it's a completely different skill set, right? It's a completely different set of muscles, and I think it's most defined on our sales side. If you look at if you think your typical SE or your typical SA. We've had to lead with consensus without implicit authority anyway, right? We've always had a kind of consensus. So you're trying to get buy-in from different groups to generate a consensus architecture build. You're trying to get security to buy off on something that's slightly out of their comfort zone.
Yeah.
Same thing with networking, things like that. So we're building consensus all the time.
Sure.
So we're already kind of team-minded.
True.
So when you get promoted into leadership, now you got a little bit of authority. So that's kind of cool. So you can kind of start setting culture in a little bit of direction.
Yeah.
But if you compare and contrast that to our sales counterparts, they're trained to be, lone wolves. Go chase that number.
Yeah.
And it's almost a completely different kind of feeling, right? When they have to become now a sales leader to grow other, team members. So I think you blend those two things together. You want your SAs to be individuals. You want to feel kind of free to be innovative and grow and develop themselves, but they still need to have kind of guardrails.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're right. You're right. Salespeople almost run a business with the logo of X, right?
Right.
Which is why SEs, SAs tend to stick around and have longevity and build. We always joke around that half the time we own the relationship. It's the salesperson that rotates in and out sometimes, right? Because we are the trusted advisor. They are just a They can't get slack for this. But they're like the intermediary, right? So like along those lines, and they make things logical in terms of financial sense. They guys have value. Don't worry, you have value.
I'm gonna distance myself a little bit from the.
I have to say though, like when you see that perfect marriage between an SA and an AE, and
What's a marriage?
And they start completing each other's sentences, and you see them in that sales call, and you see that magic, it becomes a force multiplier.
Yeah.
Right. It's unbelievable.
It's hard though. So I mean, I'm going to go back to that because that is part of being in a leadership role, right? It is a marriage. It's a complementary, like symbiotic, relationship that you're trying to create. And it might be that you have to shift teams, right?
100%.
Bob might not get along with X person. So if he's in a leadership role, he can assign to somebody else. But if he wasn't in that role, what does he do? So as the leader, you have to say like, okay, this person, I know what they're like. Bob is like, he likes these super details. This person likes to move fast and just kind of like swag it. So they're not going to work out super well. Maybe they'll balance if their personalities personally work, but otherwise that's just not going to work. And it's finding those balances, like you said, of personalities and work ethic, and that dichotomy it's a little bit hard to kind of massage in the right place, right?
Yeah, I would say that's true, and especially for like more senior SAs, they have a style, right. But I think for SAs that are earlier in their career and they're super eager, bright, talented, they just like absorb information like it's going out of style. What I would say to them is look at their sales counterparts. There's so many right answers to a selling style.
Sure.
So instead of just saying, oh, okay, this rep doesn't do it that way or this way, look at yourself as almost like filling in what they don't have.
Right. Yes.
Like what I'll say is like some of my academy grads that right out of college go through the VMware Academy, and I've had wonderful success with them, is like if I ask the 4 reps that they cover, what type of SE they are, I'll get 5 different answers. And I know why. Yeah. Because those are 4 different reps. And like one is more technical. So, the academy grad might step back on the tech and be maybe more business or maybe more big picture or forward thinking or something like that. So they change the way they interact or fill out the sales call based on which rep they're with.
So so along those lines, do you personally, or does VMware, as blanket answer, is there any kind, because that's advanced soft skills in my book, right? That's not even, on some episodes we talk about whiteboarding, or we might talk about like how you listen to people or body language, whatever. That's advanced like skills in terms of understanding a person. I don't want to say their core, but yeah, kind of.
It is, but I do think that like one of the things that's unique about corporate at VMware is that we do have an extreme ratio. Other organizations, are 1-to-1, maybe 1-to-2.
Okay.
But my typical SE covers 4 or even 5 AEs.
Okay.
Right. So they are dealing with different personalities.
What about we're 1-to-91, something like that?
I don't know.
Each of us?
We have 100
Yeah, it's very different. I understand.
I was joking that, right? Like I cover 90 sellers and 2,000 accounts, and so do you, and so does everybody.
No, but that I appreciate that though, because that is a tough thing. And I know I'll give you a perfect example. I talked to enterprise global SESA person recently, and they have one account, right? And it's quite a shift. One of the people on my team was actually a couple people on our team came from a vendor. They covered one account maybe, and we kind of have to prepare them. Like, listen, you may or may not cover multiple, reps. You're going to cover a lot of accounts either way. You have to be prepared for what that is, whether it's cultural, whether it's level of effort, whatever that is. Understand that. That's definitely. And I don't know if you have peek behind the curtain here, but I've definitely before had to kind of shift people. Encouraged like, oh, well, this person's actually really a person, but when in reality, I know that's not, they're not going to really get along.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, I've had to do that. I mean, it doesn't. I mean, there's definitely situations where you're going to have to make some changes based on personality.
I'm like that, so I mean,
Well, I think that,
I've
and
been
that's,
shifted, so.
that I think is part of the, like this, nexus of sales and technical and then, engineering and leadership that we all find ourselves in, which is that more of the people skills and the psychology and the understanding people and how to make them happy and motivated, like works its way into what, all of us started out as like, oh, I deal with computers because I don't like people, and eventually you realize that when you get into about the position that we're in, that it's more of a people job than it is
it's true.
a technical job, right?
It's funny. I actually almost did. So I always wanted to be an SA, and for when I first came to CDI, a Sun gentleman, I won't name his name. Sun gentleman basically told me, listen, capital S, you're just going to be selling. It's not solutions, it's sales. And, you're a sales architect. And like, we went to lunch, he was going through all this stuff. And I'm like, well, I don't know if I want to do that. I don't know. I don't want to be a salesperson. I'm okay with being passionate and conveying what I'm trying to do, but I don't want to sell the person on it. I want them to kind of sell themselves. Hopefully, like I talk about it well enough, right? And I found my way, obviously, but it was funny. I got scared because, like you said, and we've talked about before, we're extroverted introverts.
Yeah.
So that introverted part of me was like, well, that's not going to work. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
I mean, it goes along the way. It's like, I mean, it certainly seemed more black and white to me, 20 years ago. About like, hey, how you architect something. It's like, well, of course it's Sun. I mean, who would use HP, right? So and now
it just got canceled.
And now that I'm at VMware, I'm realizing that now, I mean, there's multiple right answers, right? As long as it includes VMware, of course.
Oh.
So
so I think we're going to take a caller. I think HPE's on the line. Antonio Neary's on the line real quick. Yeah, Antonio. But yeah, no, I mean, you're spot on. I mean,
so I do think that that's also true for SAs. Like, I think like if SAs came up from the customer side or they came up from a particular lineage, they do have a bias. We all have a confirmation bias. We're like, oh, we're going to, it's going to be XYZ, whatever vendor that is.
Right.
And I think that like, that's also super important for new SAs to understand that there's, and especially working for a CDI or any partner that has so many different items on their line card.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't possibly be an expert in everything you guys can represent.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. And that's certainly a thing as teams grow as well, right? I mean, and CDI, I think when CDI kicked off on the growth spree, right? It was a small SA team.
Yeah.
Each of the component companies that got acquired along the way, of which I came from one of, was a small SA team. So there was kind of that, like, well, you have to be able to talk about everything.
Yeah.
And then once we've grown the teams, there's been the ability to
hit that threshold. Yeah.
Yeah. To give some focus, right? I like to call it focus, right? I don't think anybody should be exclusively one thing or another. You don't want to pigeonhole anybody, but give some focus to know that you can have certain members of the team go deeper on certain technologies, certain product sets, certain, business problems to solve, right? And not everybody has to try to know everything. It's a team. And so you can act as a team. And that's, I think, the beautiful thing to your point about, solution architects and sales engineers versus salespeople who are by their nature very competitive and kind of want to keep things, close to the chest a lot in terms of what they're doing and what their success is and things like that. We're very team driven. So we support each other and it's great to be able to leverage that to get, sort of that gestalt, greater whole than all the components, right?
What's funny is, in reality, all we did is like, we find it to be a very unique thing. And we're like leaders in a space in terms of like what we're kind of talking about in terms of like letting people like gravitate towards the technology. In reality, it's doing what vendors do, and having SMEs. So in reality, we finally hit that threshold of body count, so that we're able to be like, well, what do you like? What do you like to do? Okay, well, I like SASE. I like security. I like this. I like, networking. Well, what do you like? Oh, you like Aruba. Okay, cool. So this is you then. You're like, I want you to know everything. You need to know the story a little bit. So like, okay, you bring in the Cisco guy, or okay, well, this is clear pass versus ice or whatever it is, type of thing. But
you on my team, you're saying all the words, man.
I'm trying to impress you, in case I need a new job.
Yeah.
In case this leadership thing doesn't pan out, But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. But it's hard. That stuff's even hard. I know we're going through a change where, I mentioned SASE. We're going to probably even go through and have everybody, even on the data centers, like traditional data center side, learn that story, just because everybody wants that, whatever that is, right? That work from anywhere, workloads anywhere, or whatever thing.
Yeah. I mean, we did the same thing. I think it's interesting. There's only so much you can jam into an SA's brain, right? There's just only so much space where they can do it, and that just starts to become diminishing returns, right?
Sorry, I'm smiling because in my head I'm picturing, if you remember a long time ago, the show Married with Children.
Yes.
With the football episode with the facts.
She's full. Stop. Yes.
It was like who the dog was, like things like that were like falling out of her head.
Yes.
So that's like when you were saying that,
100%.
I was laughing in my head.
I think I know that episode well. Yeah. It's hilarious. And anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about, we're really sorry because that did not age well. Okay.
I feel like that whole series
did not age well. No. No. But so for instance, so we encouraged, and what's pretty interesting is that although every solution architect, solution engineer at VMware has 3 tickets a year, basically 3 exam vouchers, on the company per calendar year to go take whatever VCP they want to do. So they can start collecting a bunch of tickets and they can do that. And then the same thing at Explore, like if they're going to Explore with their customers and things, they can go and sit for exams and,
nice.
and gather a bunch of certs, And I have a bunch of people
just go in there and try.
I have a bunch of people that are just like, absolutely, they're just great test takers. I am not a great test taker. And they are, they'll just collect all these things. So we did one where we're big into multi-cloud. So we kind of made it a soft mandate last year, and then we made it a mandate this year, like go get your multi-cloud. And we made shirts for folks who got their multi-cloud. And yes, I did get it. I didn't just steal the swag. I actually passed.
You were handing them out, so you're like,
one goes to me
and one for you.
I don't even have to get this, sir.
And I'll tell you a funny leadership story. So what's funny is so my boss, so one of my peer out west, she dropped the gauntlet on me. She says, "Hey, we're going to Explore. Let's go take the test together." I said, "All right, fine." I didn't, so now I'm cramming for this thing. It's like, I got to do at least, if I'm going to fail, let me fail by just a little.
Right.
Right. So I'm cramming for this, and I'm talking to one of my staff solution architects. I'm like, "So how hard is this test?" He's like, "Oh my God, here's my study guide." Right. Like he's trying to help me. And we sit for the exam, and I got the minimum passing score, right? So just full pass.
There's no
I get it.
PA when you get a certification. I understand. There's just a certification.
Minimum passing grade. But the effect that I had on my team was senior members were like, oh, Moran passed the test. How hard could it be? and the more junior members on my team were like, oh, Mike passed the test. I gotta get this, right? so I had the net positive incentive,
right,
for all the wrong reasons. It's awesome.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. For our master service competency for VMware and AWS, me and one of my peers went to Palo Alto to take a class. It was the only place that they were doing it. And I came back, I think I took that cert for that 3 times. Every single time it was different questions, first of all, completely different questions. I'm like, I don't know what this answer bank is, but it's ridiculous for this one niche thing. So it took me so long to pass this one test because it was just different every time. So I as soon as I left, I'm like, what do I remember? Okay, let me study those different things and get the answers. And it would be something else.
Mm-hmm. So just a quick aside. Bob did move into the kombucha level of this particular bottle.
I was watching.
Yeah. I like it.
Might be a little strong.
I don't know.
That's
now I'm curious. Now I gotta try some of the
It's live yeast. It's good for you. It's good for you.
Yep.
Gut health.
The earthy smell.
Yeah.
Right. Feel it.
Yep. I mean, it's totally harmless.
Oh, it's completely fine.
Yeah, it's totally harmless, but most people when you see a bottle condition.
And 4 of these bottles in. So, I mean, so let me ask this. Like, so we always like to have kind of a key takeaway for the people watching. And along those lines, once again, since you are a leader in the space, you've done the job, and you do lead a team. You do try to foster talent. What do you think is a key takeaway of someone that? I guess I'm gonna ask you 2 parts. Like, 1, getting to where you are in terms of that leadership role, and 2, just growing within their own spot. Because I made that joke about like someone just wants money, so they think they're like, oh, I need a team. So like. What do you think as an individual contributor, how they can grow, and like how can you grow into leadership?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I don't think it should be about money, although everybody thinks it is. And most organizations now have recognized that, and they have created a very robust SA role. Where if you're familiar with what VMware has done, and EMC in the past, and they have these principals and senior principals and fellows, right? Yeah. And if you make back when I was at EMC, when you made principal, I mean that's a director level position without. I mean you're making bank
without direct reports.
You're making plenty of dough, no direct reports, and you're sought after. You were part of an elite core. You were evaluated by your peer group. Somebody that had principal engineer, it meant something, and that's exactly the same thing.
It's really important to have that track, right? Because there are people who are just, you want to encourage them to be able to continue to grow.
That's new.
And they just may not wish to be leaders, or maybe they're not.
Exactly. Or a different kind of leadership. And I think that's the part. I think there's still
thought leadership versus people leadership.
Absolutely. And I think that like I have staff engineers and senior staffs that I rely on as lieutenants, that I use as a sounding board. So I'm not managing them; they manage themselves. They manage me more than I manage them.
Right.
So I'm removing roadblocks for them. I'm enabling them to kind of step in and really kind of do some stuff. So I think it's super important for any organization that doesn't have that to develop it and then figure out how to brand it so that it means something. Because I think like what I saw amazing at EMC and VMware is that notion where to make senior staff, it is a committee.
Okay.
Right. Like it's your packet is being submitted and it's being evaluated.
Interesting.
Right?
Okay.
And if you don't make it the first time, you get constructive feedback, and the manager that submits the candidate gets this feedback and then has that one-on-one with the candidate, says, hey, look, this isn't a failure. This is a gap analysis.
Yeah.
You're amazing. You're already a staff engineer. You're doing amazing stuff.
That's tough. It's still tough.
It's still tough.
People aren't good at feedback.
It's hard, and it's hard. But I think that track for the folks that just want to own it and just be that technologist, I mean, do it. Because I can tell you, it's harder to become a senior staff engineer in VMware than it is to become a manager. I can tell you that for sure, for 100%, 100%, right? And then also, if you want to develop a completely different skill set around consensus building, around building and developing teams, around looking at folks and giving them, a plan of how they want to develop, then, go get into people leadership, right? Like I think that part, like I did some math on the side, and I was like, I think I'm in my 19th year of leading teams.
Okay.
So I've now been leading teams longer than I've been in SE, and I'm happy to not be the smartest person in the room anymore, right? Like that's what my job is. My job is to hire people way smarter than me.
Yeah.
That is probably, if you started out as an SE to go into leadership, that is the first hurdle you got to get over.
Yeah.
Is your job is to hire people smarter than you.
Well, I mean, I think it's like, as your kids get older, understanding that they might beat you in a video game or a sport or whatever. It's not that same thing. It's like, you want them better than you, but you also kind of don't.
Right.
Yeah. But there's also things about that is that you also remember that that's not your job anymore.
Exactly.
You're not, that's not what defines you.
Right. Yeah.
The success of your team defines you.
Yes.
Yeah.
So like believe me, it's been 19 years and I'm still learning that lesson. Right?
Yeah.
Like, so your team success is your success as an SA leader.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what you got to lean on. So if you're not hiring A players, you're doing yourself a disservice. If you're not hiring people better than you, you're doing yourself a disservice. And then if you're not taking the folks, And as good as they are, they still have gaps. And you're still managing those high potential people, those highly successful people, among the hardest people to manage.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Sure.
But they need it because they have blinders on. They have blinders to certain aspects of their skill set.
Yeah, it's hard to coach someone that's already successful because
100%.
there's a persona and a ego that kind of comes with that, even if they don't realize it, or it's not directly that way, it's still there, right? So it's hard to crack that shell.
Sure. They'll appreciate it. They might not say it openly, but I think they do.
Like my kids.
I don't know. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, no, that was fantastic. Bob, do you have any other, like I think there was a lot of good gems, that we talked about today. Do you have anything else that you want to say before we kind of wrap up?
Yeah, well, other than the cider was delicious.
It was.
You could tell
Thank
by my
you.
going
Yeah.
back for seconds, thirds,
I know.
and fourths. But no, I mean, I think that was actually really insightful, and I appreciate getting some of those gems myself, right? Because like all of us, right? Like I'm still learning into that role, and I myself came up from being SE, and some of those lessons, right? That it's about making your team successful rather than grabbing the spotlight for yourself. Those are things that are hard to always remember in the heat of the moment sometimes. So
It is.
great great conversations.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining another episode of SAs and IPAs and
Solutions and cider.
Solutions
that's right.
Insider. Solutions Insider. Cheers.
Cheers. There you go. Good soul.
SAs and IPAs, a production of CDI Studios. SAs is produced by Spencer Grogan and Alyssa Hall. Please like and subscribe to CDI's YouTube channel to stay up to date on the latest CDI content, including videos on our practice areas and our bi-weekly installments of CDI Live, where experts sit down to answer your questions on today's trending technology topics. You can also follow the podcast on your favorite podcast directory.